guess from the way I grew up, I've always loved fast things. I love flying float planes, and that goes back to the fact that my father had the first Tiger Moth in the Southern Hemisphere on floats. He fitted those himself, and as far as I know, there's never been one since. Now, growing up as a child, amongst other things, flying around in a float plane, which is great. I mean, it's all the fun of a speedboat and aeroplane in one.
My sons all took after their father. They were adventurous. They were right from the start into bikes, motorbikes, speedboats, you name it, they were doing it.
After hearing about my father from when I was a young boy, with his exploits on motorcycles and the stunt work that he was doing on them, as I grew old enough, I first tried to do it on push bike. That didn't work, and there was a few spills. But when at 16, I got my first motorcycle. Then I went out and secretly practiced, and after I could do things like standing on the seat, no hands, with a couple of almost actions, but I didn't have any, I showed my father, and after years of not doing anything, it rekindled his interest, and we put an act together which involved both of us standing on the seat of the motorcycle, no hands, and climbing ladders. I even did a handstand on top of one of those ladders, and we started doing acts in the Royal Hobart Show, and Launceston and Devonport and the other shows around the state. And after a couple of years doing those acts, including adding goyles, used to get on my father's shoulders as well, the French hell drivers came to Tasmania driving Tiranas on 2 wheels. And we figured this was only an extension of the motorcycle, and I bought a Tirana and I tried driving on 2 wheels. I was having some success until I showed my brother. And that was really annoying. He got into that Tirana and just drove it on 2 wheels with virtually not more than an hour's practice. And I'd already been trying for days. Anyway, he learned very quickly. We were going to do our act in the next Hobart show, so we incorporated the car into the show. And the worst part was there was only a small amount of practice we'd had, and in the act I climbed out of the car through what was the passenger window, was now at the top of the car, because we drove with the steering wheel side down. And on the Thursday, public day of the Hobart show, mainly because my brother learnt so quickly and didn't realise that part of the steering wasn't strong enough, the steering of the car broke, and that's the last I remember for approximately 3 weeks.
This was a really bad time for us. Eugene was unconscious for about 3 weeks in hospital. It was very touch and go. But they've all got the will to survive, exactly like their dad, and he pulled through with no effects at all afterwards.
So the doctor said I wouldn't recover, and if I did, I'd be a vegetable. So maybe I'm now a flying vegetable, but I think I'm okay. But that was a part of my life which I'd rather not remember.
Yeah, well, I've always done mechanical things, I suppose. I always used to fix all my father's aeroplanes and cars when I was a kid. He used to let me work on just about anything. And then later on I went to tech and got my small engine certificate, which later on I got qualified to work on light aircraft, so that's where I fixed all my brother's aircraft at flying school. I was involved in motorbikes to start with, and I always rode a motorbike. But Tasmanian weather being a bit cold, it wasn't long before I decided to drive around in a car. It was a lot nicer. So I always ride a bike, and I never raced motorcycles. I left that to my brother. But racing cars, I did get involved in them, and I did win quite a few good races in Tasmania. I never sort of travelled overseas with my racing, but I had some good racing in Tasmania and enjoyed it.
After being state champion racing motorbikes for 3 years and doing professional stunt work with them, I discovered ultralight aeroplanes. one from Sydney. Although I'd done a lot of flying with my father, I'd never taken off and landed an aeroplane, only watched him, and possibly had my hands on the controls and feeling what happened, but never actually done it. So I put my first plane together, and like all people at that time, went out to a paddock and taxied around, and then went a little bit faster, slowed down, sped up, hopped off the ground, put it down again. So it was a hop, a skip, but eventually I had to make a jump. And one day I did, and it wasn't so bad. I took off quite easily and I flew around. This was great. Of course, that was back in the days when you weren't allowed to fly higher than 300 feet above the ground, or cross roads, so, in fact, highways. So it was more like ever decreasing circles around the local farm paddock. Eventually this circle decreased to a stage where I had to try and land. And the stand land technique of a conventional aircraft didn't work. So I came down the first time, and I could see I was going to crash, so on with the power and went round. Went back up and thought about it, and thought, I'm sure I did that right. I was enough above stall speed, this should land. So, okay, I tried again. It still didn't work. I was starting to get worried now, but I knew of another technique which used more power through the landing when you're landing in a short paddock in general aviation aircraft, so I tried that one and it worked. So I sat back and relaxed and thought, well, I must try again. Went up, and over the rest of that day and the following day I perfected the landing technique. So I was now a pilot. That's how it was done then. After my first flights, I obviously kept on flying and got better at it. At that stage, in the early days of ultralight aircraft, they were building new ones, new designs every couple of months. So I started importing them, selling the ones I had, buying new ones, upgrading all the time, as well as upgrading my ability to fly, until around the mid-80s they brought out two-seat aircraft. So I immediately bought one of those and started teaching. As time went by, I became a chief flying instructor. Due to the fact that I was selling aircraft and teaching people to fly, what started as a hobby, as time went by, became a full-time business, and I'm now based up at Georgetown with a fleet of 5 aircraft, which involves small two-seat aeroplanes with nose wheels, with tail wheels, and even an amphibious float plane for teaching off the water, which makes it one of the larger flying schools in Australia. At Freedom Flight Flying School at Georgetown, we have approximately 30 students at most times, as some people get their licences, new ones come along, and it's such a privilege to be able to show people what I enjoy so much, and eventually they do too. The average student is probably 40s plus, people that always wanted to fly all their life, didn't have the time or the money, and now they can. Once we're up there, Georgetown is a great community, and many people say, why did you move to Georgetown? And I say, come up and have a look. The scenery up there is fantastic, it's a great group of people. It's also an industrial town, which is very handy when you need parts. And in fact, in the Australian newspaper, recently, they wrote it up as one of the top sea change locations in Australia. And I've flown around most of the airports on the eastern seaboard of Australia. I really believe are the best location that there is at Georgetown. Some may disagree, as are elsewhere, but I certainly feel that way. And most people agree after flying with me up there. And they find that Tasmania has such a diverse form of scenery over such a small distance between the coastlines at Georgetown, over the Great Lakes, down to Strahan, the west coast, Port Davey. It's all within a couple of hours in an aeroplane. And the scenery just changes so much, it's almost like changing countries. As they start, the average person comes out, they can't even start the engine. And it really is a privilege to show them how it all works, build up their confidence, till the day they spread their wings and you send them solo. Now I guess I'm just so lucky that all my life, whether it's from motorcycles and now of aeroplanes, I've managed to turn what would be my hobby into my job. And that makes every day going to work a holiday. And there's nothing better.
You'll ever had, and I'm looking forward to the day I actually go solo.